too long since I've checked in. Well over a month. It has not been laziness. I actually have been on the road essentially three of the last 5 weeks. So I was in New York for a week, then I came back for a week, but that week was very much disrupted. Uh, we had a COVID situation in the house, and so I had to maroon myself in the basement. Um, and before I could ever even go upstairs, I had to go back to New York for another week. And so I left for New York on Sunday afternoon and came back Thursday night. And then on Saturday morning at like 6 a.m., we were on the road out of town to Chicago. So I was in Chicago all last week. So I've been back all this week. I have worked out. Me and Rick hit it on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm going to get in. The week I was back, we actually did all three as well, though. Actually, I misspoke. We actually did all three as well. We did short workouts just like we did this week. We've been doing three. We've been doing 3 circuits, just 3 sets. We want to minimize the amount of time we're going to be away. Unfortunately, I'm off next weekend. We won't be able to work out, but we did hit all 3 muscle groups this week. So when I come back from this last little break, we'll be local, but we'll be traveling quite a bit in the area. Little in the summer thing with my wife and daughter. Where my wife is off next week, I'm off next week. We'll be in the area, but we'll be doing a lot of running around. But when we come back from that, it's really going to be go time. But I wanted to do a quick weight check. I've been concerned, but because being away so much is very, very difficult to maintain my diet. I have not been having my meals. I've been away. I don't even remember the last time I had a meal from my meal service, Fresh and Lean. But I did weigh myself on Monday. The number was really ugly. I'll see it in a minute. But I'm happy to say that this week has been absolutely flawless. I've done 2 24-hour fasts. I fasted yesterday from noon until this morning when I weighed myself at 11 a.m. So, I've been on it as soon as I came back. So, that's encouraging. But my weight was the heaviest I've been since mid 2020 on Monday when I got back from my break. So it's been a great week. Let's get on the scale and see where I'm at. Obviously next week is definitely a big question mark, but I'm encouraged that I'm still just able to snap back like that onto my diet. Like I said, 2 24-hour fasts. I've had nothing but water all week. So that's encouraging that I have not lost my discipline, but it is very difficult to maintain while I'm traveling. But let's see where I'm at. I got off the scale at 11, so let's see where I'm at right now. So I'm at 261.2. You can see I'm down exactly 10 pounds. I was 271.1 on Monday morning. So my BMI is back under 30. So overweight is a BMI of 25 to 29.9. Over 30 is considered obese. My body fat is utterly atrocious. Skeletal muscle mass, bone mass, my body water is very low. So when I'm about 240, my body water is closer to 53-54%, but there's a trade-off because my body fat will come down. It's got to go somewhere. But that's where I'm at. I'm at 261.2. Not a great number, but I will take it just considering where I've been the last 5 weeks essentially. So that's where I'm at in terms of my weight. So now that the weight check is out of the way, a lot to share. So anybody who just wanted to know my weight, you can log off right now. That's where I'm at. I'm at 261. I had my doctor's visit maybe 3 weeks ago, whatever week I was back and marooning myself in the basement. I was 254 point something when I went to the doctor. Like she measured it. And I set a follow-up appointment for my annual check-in on November 11th at 2 p.m. I'm going to make a hard push. But what I will say is, um, I want to get into what I've been doing the last month. And it's just been a lot of reading, a lot of learning, a lot of studying up on nutrition. And it's been perspective changing. I started with the obesity code again because I felt like the level of prioritization, the level of detail, I feel like I had gotten away from that in the first half of the year. And my mother suggested that I just reread the obesity code to kind of awaken, what's been inside of me the last 3 years, 4 years, whatever you want to call it, where I've really taken my health a lot more seriously. Um, so I finished the obesity code, and it definitely got me, thinking about details a lot more, thinking about the science behind why I need to do what I'm doing. It's easy to forget. And when I forget, it's easy to become lax about it and just have less prioritization on it. But I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole. Jason Fung, who wrote the obesity code, referenced another book called Why We Get Fat. He referenced it several times in this book, a good 4 or 5 times. And after reading it this time, I said to myself, you know what? Let me just go check that book out. And I actually did. And after finishing it, I just found it. I doubt you'll be able to see this, but there is the book in my Audible library, Why We Get Fat. So you can see finished. I finished that book in about a week. It was only like 10 hours or so. But I really found this guy's kind of train of thought extremely interesting and extremely insightful. So I went to his next book immediately, and there's about 5.5 hours left on this book. I think it's like 9 or 10 hours. It's called The Case for Keto. There's a difference between him and Jason Fung. Philosophically feel the same way. Processed carbs are the devil. The is not only just what we eat, is the timing of what we eat. But I can see where Jason Fung was inspired quite a bit by this book. He talks about it several times. They have somewhat similar philosophies in terms of the cause of what has created this obesity epidemic, which is now global. And they are very much in alignment that it is the way we eat has changed quite a bit. Our grandparents' generation, the quiet generation, the Depression era babies, are the last generation that did not have obesity as a problem. And Gary Taubes talks quite a bit about how human history on this planet spans 3 million years, and obesity was a rarity. It was very much an uncommon trait for, he says, 99.9% of our time on this planet. And now in the last 50 years, he cites the same time frame as Jason Fung, he actually, no, actually I'm getting things confused. But he does say the same time frame when processed foods became the normal, the norm in the late 60s, early 70s. Within a generation, we've seen an obesity epidemic, and it is spreading worldwide. And he talked about how he used the same exact examples that Jason Fung used in terms of when trading posts first started to show up with native reservations in the United States. Among those populations, there was a high propensity of poverty. But he said before these trading posts started to show up and they started to bring grains into their diet and sugars into their diet and sodas into their diet, despite the fact that there was a high level of poverty, obesity was a rarity. And he talks about how some of these reservations now have such an incredibly high level of obesity and diabetes. And similar to Jason Fung, he just made a very compelling case, and his philosophy is very much the same. We're taught to eat constantly. We're taught to eat a high propensity of grains, sugars. All of these processed foods have the fiber removed, which acts as which invokes the satiety hormone. So we never necessarily feel totally satisfied in terms of our meals. They talk about how the sugar. Jason Fung didn't say, he said it in a different way, but Gary Taubes and another person I watched on YouTube, this is a person where I started to say I got things confused. Robert Lustig, who was an endocrinologist at the University of California, San Francisco, who I spoke on some lectures I watched from him last summer. One's called Fat Chance. They both say the same thing, that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. Like, it is a highly, highly addictive substance. And so it creates cravings. So where Gary Taubes and Jason Fung differ, Jason Fung does not tell people to restrict any particular food group. He actually is not a fan of any particular kind of diet. Jason Fung is just a very, very big proponent of remove all added sugar from your diet, remove all processed foods from your diet. Do not drink soda, whether it is normal or diet soda. And Jason Fung, in particular, noted that it is not about your glucose levels, it is about your insulin response. And he said that fructose is particularly deadly. I don't think Gary Taubes went into this level of detail, but he said it is particularly deadly because fructose can only be metabolized by your liver. And so it is particularly toxic for your liver to be constantly taking in high fructose corn syrup. And he talked about how there was this thought that because fructose had such a moderate reaction in terms of the glycemic index, which is the measure of the rise in blood sugar, there was a thought that it was actually an improvement over regular table sugar. But he said when researchers found that fructose is particularly toxic because only your liver can process it, and if you're constantly taking in high fructose corn syrup, it's going to create a severe strain on your liver. But what Jason Fung says about diet sodas, Gary Taubes does not promote diet sodas. He just doesn't speak on it. He says stay away from sodas. But I've done some research, or should say I've done some looking up of some random foods to see if they're keto friendly, and I'll get to that, the ketogenic diet, in a bit. Jason Fung flat out says there is an insulin response that rivals regular soda by diet soda. Your insulin levels increase. So he says if you think you're gaming the system, you're not. Just because it doesn't have calories doesn't mean it does not create an insulin response. And he said it is not about glucose. This is not about just sugar. It is about controlling your insulin levels. So that's something I definitely have in my mind. No one is a big proponent of diet sodas because everyone knows that there are long-term health impacts with drinking a lot of diet soda. But Jason Fung is like, even for weight loss, you're not gaming the system by drinking diet soda. You are still giving yourself an insulin spike by drinking diet soda. So that's a major area that I have some work to do on. Since the pandemic has started, I have become a routine soda drinker. Like I would dabble in it before, but I feel like I developed an addiction to cola and diet cola over this last 2.5 years. So that is something I have to work on. Another area where Jason Fung and Gary Taubes disagree, as I said, I've already stated this. Jason Fung is just all about whole foods. Avoid all added sugar, avoid all processed foods. But Jason Fung says do not restrict carbohydrates. If you want to have fruit, he calls sugar the poison and he calls fiber the antidote. And he states in his book over and over, Mother Nature has packaged the antidote with the poison, so it's a net neutral effect. So he is not a proponent of restricting fruits and vegetables. Gary Taubes, as I just showed you, the latest book that I'm reading is called The Case for Keto. He really gets in a very detailed manner into the science of how the body works. And I feel like I roll my eyes every time I hear one of these dudes at the gym saying, don't eat carbs. And it's just like, you hear that, but I hear that over and over and over. I've heard that for the last 20 something years. Um, I remember my ex girlfriend tried the Atkins diet for like 3 days, and she was like out of it, because there is something that Gary talks about in his book. He talks about your body is going through withdrawal, and that's where he likened it to cocaine. He's like, when we tell someone to not use cocaine because going through withdrawal for a couple of weeks is going to be difficult. He said, no. Like, will we tell an alcoholic to continue drinking because going through withdrawal is so difficult? But she could not take that process, and so she quit the diet. But Gary Taubes gets into so much detail. I mean, Jason Fung does state it. I just don't think he goes into the same level of detail in terms of discussing how different people's bodies metabolize in a different way, and everyone is different. And he does explain this quite a bit. The one commonality between the three people, I've really been taking a lot of information from Jason Fung, Robert Lustig, who has a bunch of videos on YouTube, and Gary Taubes. They are huge proponents of throw away the whole measure of a calorie. Robert Lustig in his speech that's on YouTube, Fat Chance, he says, if you're doing math, you are part of the problem. Let me repeat that. If you're doing math, if you're counting calories, you are part of the problem. He says calories do not drive fat storage, fat accumulation. It is insulin, and that's common between Jason Fung, Gary Taubes, and Robert Lustig. They deviate in terms of what the solution is, but the commonality is it is not about counting calories. That processed foods are what have driven the obesity epidemic. To stay away from the processed foods, to stay away from sugar, and to stay away from anything that comes in a box or a can or a package. Whole foods, but Gary deviates from Jason Fung and Robert Lustig in that he is a proponent specifically of keto, although he says it is particularly for people who have an abnormal level of fat accumulation. He's not saying everyone on planet Earth should be on a ketogenic diet. He says if you have a propensity to gain weight very easily, then you really need to be on the ketogenic diet. And he explains why in such incredible depth. I feel like I have such a great understanding. I do feel like I need to go through these two books again. So I'm going to commit to listening to them again by the end of the year, like November, December. But Jason Fung explained this, but Gary just goes into it in such detail. He talks about some research studies from the 1950s and 1960s that really came to the conclusion that, yes, insulin is what regulates, it's a hormone that regulates our blood sugar, but it is also the key proponent in terms of regulating fat storage in the two cells. And Jason Fung explained it, and I feel like at a conceptual level, I got what he was saying. I just feel like Gary is going into such incredible detail, and I really have a better understanding of it. And I understand why these meatheads at the gym are always like, don't eat carbs, bro, even though I still hate hearing that. But I understand why, and he's very specific in terms of saying everyone is different. He goes into like, why do we have different eye colors? Why do we have different hair colors? We have different skin tones, different levels of oily skin. There's a different level. He said if you were to give 100 people cigarettes for 20 years, everyone in that group is not going to develop lung cancer. He said there's going to be a high proficiency of people who do, but everyone's not going to develop lung cancer. He says, so why do we think everyone's body regulates fat storage exactly the same? Like, he really hammers home that point. He says everyone is different, and everyone will store fat differently. But he said we need to stop thinking of fat people as lean people who just overate. It is a hormonal imbalance. He's like so adamant about it. Jason Fung's methodology was very similar to this, but I just feel like there's a level of emphaticism, I don't know if that's a word, from Gary Taubes and just hammering this point home. He goes through several different examples. He talks about the animal world. He talks about, I mentioned the part where he talked about smokers and cancer. He talks about hair color, eye color. He's like, why are all of these things different? And we just accept it in terms of, the physiology of so many other things, but we refuse to accept the fact that these calculations just don't work because everyone is different. And Jason Fung, I can't say it enough, he was the first to get me to stop thinking about counting calories. And his book led me to start watching these lectures from Robert Lustig last summer. I got away from that for a bit over the winter. But it's really awakened me. Reading the Obesity Code really got me going down this path again. And each book I'm reading, going into Why We Get Fat and now The Case for Keto, I feel like is really hammering home that point. I am going to commit to living off of the ketogenic diet through the end of the year. I want to get my blood checked. So right after I finish this week off, I'd like to get my blood checked, and then I want to get it checked again in 3 months. But Jason Fung, Robert Lustig, Gary Taubes, they all say the same thing. These low carbohydrate diets actually improve your blood profile significantly, and your body will not metabolize fats and proteins. It will not store fat from those calories the same way it will carbohydrates, particularly foods that spike insulin. And Gary Taubes is very adamant about you can eat on any kind of schedule. You don't need to have this. He says you don't need to deal with hunger to remain lean. He says when you are constantly taking in processed foods and spiking your insulin, then you're setting yourself up for failure. He also explains that you can't dip your toe in and partially do the ketogenic diet because your body will store fat at an abnormal level if it's not used to receiving carbs, and then you like have 2-3 days a week where you take in a bunch of carbs, and then 2-3 days a week where you don't. If your body is not used to it, it's going to store it at an abnormally high level. He doesn't say you have to remove it completely, but he said this stuff needs to be rare. Like if you go to a wedding, a birthday party, and want to have a piece of cake, fine, but it can't be a normal part of your diet. So, even within that, I'm thinking about how do I structure this? I need to stay away from cheat meals, but the thing I will say is if we're talking, I can eat an unlimited amount of red meat, white meat in terms of chicken, fish, cheese. There are lots of things that I can have where I can feel satiated and feel like I've given myself a treat without having a spike in my insulin. My wife and I just went to Silver Diner, and they have a steak omelet with cheese, and I had turkey bacon and turkey sausage, and I felt like I was able to pig out. And I just told them no biscuit, no home fries, no sauces. And so there's lots of stuff I can have that won't spike my insulin levels. I'm not gonna eat. I've looked at some stuff outside of what Gary Taubes says. He does not say you can eat unlimited amounts. He says eat until you're satiated. He says eat until you're full. If you're hungry, then go eat. Just stay off of the anything that's processed, anything that's going to drive an insulin response, and any starchy vegetables and fruits. There are fruits you can eat. Surprisingly, strawberries, apples. There are fruits that I can have. I've been having green leafy vegetables. So my wife cooked me steak on Tuesday, and I had asparagus with it. I had baked chicken yesterday with spinach. Like, I'm not going to cut out all carbohydrates. And he's adamant about that. You can have all the unlimited green leafy vegetables because those are very high in fiber and very high in antioxidants. But he says do not touch potatoes. He even says don't touch sweet potatoes. Like, stay away from those completely. Do not ever eat bananas. Do not ever eat grapes. These things spike your blood insulin in similar manner to they're very high in sugar and very low in fiber, so they create a severe insulin response that's similar to a lot of processed foods. Says the same about potatoes, all grains. So he's like, no grains. So I will stop with the oatmeal. But I'm going to continue to read this book. I'm going to continue to learn about this. I'm not going to stop with this Gary Taubes book. I've already got a book from Robert Lustig that I've downloaded called Metabolical. It seems like it's a more comprehensive, is a more comprehensive view of him from his the lectures that he gave on YouTube that I watched, Fat Chance, and there's another one called Processed Food, a 50-year experiment that has failed. So it's about 10 hours. So I'm going to read that next. But I'm really, really enjoying this. And what I will say is it is hard to make bad food decisions when you are aware of what the implications are. When I didn't know, like the term ignorance is bliss, it can be a curse just considering what the ramifications are. But one thing I will say in terms of listening to all three of these individuals and their philosophies, and everything they're doing is research based. This isn't, like I said, Gary Taubes talked in detail. He laid out the same case that Jason Fung did. When you look at diabetes, what is type 1 diabetes? This is something most people are born with, and it is an inability to produce insulin. And what happens, people cannot store fat. People cannot store energy. And so they have to take insulin injections to be able to store fat. If you are too lean, you actually will die. Your body needs a constant source of energy. Fat is natural. There's a reason we store it. The issue is when we store too much. But then they provide the opposite, which is type 2 diabetes. And that's there you have too high of an insulin level and it causes all types of other problems. But there is a huge concentration of people that are obese that have diabetes. The Jason Fung calls it diabesity. There are people who are lean with diabetes because they take in high levels of sugar. People who drink high levels of diet soda may be leaner, but it's still causing an insulin problem. It's causing an insulin imbalance. But they talk about how insulin and use diabetes research to make the case that insulin is the hormone that sends signals to the cells in terms of how much fat to store. So when you hear the don't eat carbs, they're leaving all of that out. You don't understand why, but this is why. And Gary also goes into detail about how this causes cancer. And he specifically spoke on pancreatic cancer because people who are obese that have very, very high and sustained levels of insulin are running your pancreas like you're running a car 24 hours a day with the pedal to the metal. You're going to wear it out. And so there's a high propensity of people who are obese who get pancreatic cancer for that very reason. The pancreas is very instrumental in regulation of insulin within your blood. So he talked about that. He brought up other kinds of cancer that have a huge propensity. And he also talked about he gave statistical data on different cancer levels and their um what is the word? How concentrated they are amongst the obese versus people versus populations that do not eat a Western diet. He talked about how breast cancer is rare in parts of Asia, particularly in places where they still are on kind of the paleo diet, where they're still hunter gatherers. He talked about how there has been a spike in breast cancer and other types of cancer. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. He spoke about this and why we get fat, which I finished last week. But he talked about this. That's part of the reason I read these books 3 or 4 times, so that stuff sinks in. But he talks about how cancer is not just bad luck, a random roll of the dice. What we're eating is driving high cancer rates in Western nations that eat Western processed foods diets. So, he talked about how Jason Fung said that, but he didn't talk specifically. Like, he didn't go into why the pancreas wears out because of obesity. Like, I didn't, he talked about it. I think he kind of mentioned it anecdotally that, there's a lower level of cancer, but he didn't get into the why. I think, I don't think I would have understood Gary Taubes's books if I had not read the Obesity Code. I feel like the Obesity Code was written for anyone who just has a basic understanding of the human body, and I feel like it's very informative in that sense. And it got my mind thinking in terms of how this works. And then Gary really, really drills in. He's very scientific. Everything, the same, I mean, honestly, the same thing with Jason Fung. They use a lot of research. They're not anecdotally just saying, I think this happens because of this. They're citing research studies. Um, which is why it's so believable to me. I'm someone who's very fact driven. I'm very much a skeptic. I don't just happen to believe stuff because people say it, and I'm very distrusting. Gary Taubes talks about how, his first couple of books, he was written off as a snake oil salesman, but he's like, the research is on my side, and everything I'm going to say, I'm going to back up with a research study. And so Jason Fung had the exact same mentality, and so does Robert Lustig. They're all very similar in that fact. They are all speaking from research studies. I mean, Robert Lustig is an endocrinologist, so he studies hormones, and so he studies the impact of insulin. Like, their work, all three men are very, very much factual based, research driven. So I'm not just listening to some gimmick diet where someone is just rambling off. If you do this, just drink honey and lemon and it'll melt the weight like a hot knife through butter. Like, it's none of that. Everything is very factually driven. I would definitely recommend that anyone has any interest in reading the book by Gary Taubes, read the Obesity Code first, because philosophically, he will get your mind wrapped around his philosophy. And I think Gary Taubes just goes so deep into the facts and the research. That one's a little harder to digest. The Obesity Code is very entertaining. Particularly the guy that was the orator on Audible. He was really funny. Gary Taubes is much more about just pure data. How does the human body work? And I just feel like it's very difficult for me to continue to make the same food choices. Now, that being said, I've said that about the Obesity Code 2 years ago. I have to make sure that I'm constantly touching on this information, because 3, 4 months from now, it's easy for it to seem less prevalent. The wow factor of it will wear off in some time. And so I think it's important that I just continue to take in a steady flow of information. I enjoy this stuff. Like, I really, really do. I really thought it was important for me to record this video, because I feel like I will look at this at the end of the year. I have total confidence that I will carry out this next 3 months, and I'm very curious to see what the results will be. I don't want to obsess over the scale. I want to obsess over doing the right things continuously. So I may reduce my weigh-ins and just focus on, the number one thing with me is diet, diet, diet. It is not about working out, and I understand why, because working out doesn't really impact your insulin levels all that much. And so you can work out all you want, but if you're going to work out and then have sodas and eat crap, your body is still going to send the signals to store that food, and that is compounding the issue. Like, persistent and high insulin levels are compounding the problem. So working out does not impact your insulin levels. It is not going to change the hormonal signals that are telling your body how much fat to store. That comes from diet. Lifting weights for me is about building muscle. It can chisel away at the weight, and being in a ketogenic state where my body is primarily using fat as the source of fuel, then working out will be multiplied, because as I burn energy, I'm burning fat, I'm not burning glycogen. A lot of people just continue to load up on glycogen from these carbohydrates and these sugars, and they burn that off, but it never made it to being stored as fat anyway. So it's not really helping you. If you're looking to lose weight, you need to chip away at the fat stores that exist. And so, learning all of this is really helpful, and understanding I plan to continue to fast 2 days a week, a 24-hour fast. If I'm in a ketogenic state, my body is primarily using fat as a source of fuel. So I was aware of this when I listened to, for the first time, the Obesity Code in the summer of 2020. And so I wanted to do these prolonged fasts, but I always thought, it's going to be 24 to 36 hours before I burn through my glycogen stores. If my glycogen stores are continuously low, then the impact of the ketogenic diet will be largely magnified when I go through these 24-hour fasts, because my body is already burning fat as the primary source of fuel. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited to see over time. I've been on this keto diet for the week, but I'm surprised. I've been logging my foods. I had a protein shake, and I didn't realize how much sugar was in milk. And they're recommending that I take in like fewer than 25 grams of carbohydrates. I was using skim lactate milk, but even that has 24 grams of sugar. It's naturally occurring sugar. It's lactose, but it's still there. So I'm gonna have to switch back to almond milk. But I'm discovering lots of foods. I'm surprised to see how much sugar, that even naturally occurring sugar. So Jason Fung had me focused on added sugar. The ketogenic diet is just pure net carbs. Doesn't matter where the sugar comes from, whether they're naturally occurring or not. So I had no issue eating fruits in the afternoon as long as I was eating organic sliced fruit. I can't do that on the ketogenic diet, but there are fruits that I can have. Apples have a very high levels of fiber. Strawberries surprisingly do. So there are fruits I can eat, but I've got to keep my net carbs under a certain level. So, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to continue to learn, but I want to finish this book, The Case for Keto. I'm going to read Metabolical by Robert Lustig. And then I'm going to read one more book from keto. I don't want to get all of my information from one person. So I'm going to find another keto book right after the Robert Lustig book. Like I said, I'm going to give it everything I got for the next 3 months. I'm going to continue. I'm just going to have 2 fasting days. I'm going to fast Monday and Wednesday for 24 hours. I'm going to lift 4 days a week, and I'm going to run 3 to 4 days a week. I have deferred my marathon the next year, but I'm going to focus on doing the right things, and I want to get my blood sugar measured the week after next, and then I'm going to get it measured, just my entire blood profile, my lipid profile, everything, and I want to check this stuff out in 3 months when I have my annual checkup with my doctor. So I know I've said a lot. I purposely put my weight right at the start, but there's been a lot I've been taking in the last month. I haven't just been sitting back idle doing nothing. I have not given up on my goals, even though I'm up 30 pounds this year. I feel very encouraged, and I feel like learning and understanding what to do. It was very frustrating for me when I was sticking to the calories and I was not seeing the results. And I struggled to get to even where I am now. I couldn't get under 290 for from 2014 when I got married until 2019. But even then, I stayed on this. I looked at a calorie counter. It told me like 3,400 calories, and a calorie is a calorie. And I ran like 700 miles in 2019. I ran the Baltimore Marathon, and I got down to 276, but I really struggled to stay under 280. But with this whole a calorie is a calorie BS, I didn't and there was no thought of fasting. I constantly ate. I had breakfast, lunch, dinner, two snacks in the afternoon, and I was constantly taking in food. So I was constantly stimulating an insulin response. And that is the reason when I began fasting and intermittent fasting first, and then all out fasting, doing 24-hour fasts, that's when I was able to get away from the 250 to 270, 280 range and get all the way down. But I looked at it as, it was very difficult to get below 240. Like I'm hitting 240 is kind of equivalent to what 290 used to be to me. But honestly, if I stay 240, I probably could live to be 100. Like it's a very healthy weight for someone 6'7", especially considering all the cardio I do and that my resting heart rate is in the mid 50s. My heart does not have to work hard to pump blood through my body at all. I'm actually the recommended range is 60 to 90, and I'm below that. So my heart health is very high. So I don't want to obsess over getting under 220. And Gary Taubes talks about it. He says you have to have patience, and everyone cannot attain the same level of leanness. He's like there are people with a much higher propensity to store fat. And so I will keep that in mind. And maybe 240 is the ideal weight for me. It's sustainable. I can eat a diet where I feel, but I haven't tried the ketogenic diet. I was more on just a pure whole foods diet. And last year when I got to 233, I had cut out cheat meals altogether for like the last 2 months of the year. Like I really was on a very restrictive diet in terms of no sugar, no sodas, no nothing. And then I just lost my mind between Christmas and New Year's. And then ironically, I got down to 237 and I plateaued and I got frustrated, but I got there in February. So keep in mind, I was 233 December 17th. January 1st, I was like 257. I worked my way down in like mid-February to 237, but I was so caught up in, I thought by now I'd be 220. And so I was very frustrated and very aggravated that I had felt like I was off of this imaginary perfect track. And so that really hurt my confidence, really hurt my drive. Um, and here I am at 261, and what I wouldn't do to be 237 again. But I'm going to work to get back in the 240 range by my doctor's appointment. It's 20 pounds in 3 months. That's not, 7 pounds a month is not something that's difficult for me to do. So, I feel very encouraged taking in this information. I'm very anxious to try it and try it over a period of time. That's why I say, I'll probably do a weigh-in when I come back, and then I may not weigh myself for like 4 weeks. I just want to focus on hitting my 3 to 4 runs a week, my 4 lifting sessions a week, stay on the diet, and do my 2 fasting days. Like I don't want to give myself a reason to give up. And I know everyone can relate. So I think on Fridays, I will just do a diet check where I'll talk about what I ate for the last week because I find it really helpful. I've said several times this channel feeds itself as I'm recording videos and I go back and watch them. It keeps me feeling invested. Like, yo, I put in so much time and effort, like I can't give up now. It also helps to make my goals public. It's so easy to give up on a goal that only you know about. There's no accountability. So I think I will just set out and I'm going to set the goal of just staying on my diet, doing my 2 fasting days a week, doing my 4 lifting sessions a week, and doing my 3 to 4 runs a week. And I will just check in and be very accountable in terms of what I've eaten for the last week every Friday, but I'm not going to weigh in. And I will give myself a good 4 weeks and then I'll weigh in again. So I've said a lot, but I needed to get all of that off my chest. But feeling great about where I am despite being 261 and actually going over 270 for the first time since I believe summer of 2020. But I feel good about where I am. So for now, for Reed Fitness,